Hello, Dr. Vicki Peterson here. Is there something wrong with your thyroid? Are you tired? Are you gaining weight? Do you have loss of concentration? Do you have dry skin? Do you suffer from constipation? These are some very common symptoms of hypothyroidism, meaning your thyroid's not working as well as it should. There's also depression or muscle weakness, joint pain. If you think about those symptoms, I'm tired, I'm constipated, I have pain, I've gained weight, that could describe a lot of Americans, right? Well, let's look at the flip side. What if your thyroid is working too hard and you have hyperthyroid? The symptoms are mostly the opposite of what I just said, such as weight loss, rapid heartbeat, feeling anxious, but also fatigue is on both sides of that equation. Loss of concentration, sweating, intolerance to heat. So on hypothyroid, you feel cold. On hyper, you're more heat intolerant. So mostly they're opposed to one another symptom-wise, but as I said, fatigue is on both sides of the equation. Now, the thyroid is something that's tested for regularly. I mean, any basic blood screen that you get measures the thyroid, but does it measure it correctly? And does it measure it sensitively enough? And that's really so much of the problem that we have here in the U.S. is that our tests aren't sensitive enough. So millions of people are walking around with thyroid problems and they aren't being properly addressed because they're not even diagnosed. So why is that? Why are we missing it? We're missing it because we're just not looking at enough of what that whole important thyroid gland is trying to tell us. So what's classically measured is something called TSH. It stands for thyroid stimulating hormone. So it's just stimulating the thyroid to work. Now, standard laboratories say that unless it's at 5 or 5.5 and above, you don't really have to worry about having a hypo or low functioning thyroid. But in the kind of medicine we practice, functional medicine, we have a much more stringent threshold. So as soon as that number is at 2.5, we start addressing symptoms of hypothyroid. And 2.5 to 5, 5.5 may not sound like too large a gap, but it can be. It can take quite a bit of time to move from 2.5 to 5.5, and someone, of course, is getting worse and worse. The other big problem with thyroid is that there's a lot of different hormones to measure. So there's something called T4, and a lot of standard tests measure that. The problem with that is it's not an active form of thyroid. So you really want to know how the parts of the thyroid are truly functioning, not just a level that doesn't really show activity. So the active form is called free, as in F-R-E-E, and then capital T and the number 3. So free T3. And that is the active form of the thyroid hormone, and it's showing what the thyroid is sort of actively doing. Now, there's another test called reverse T3, so sort of the opposite of T3. And that is an inactive form of the hormone. So if you don't look at the ratio between those two, you could look at your TSH and you could look at your T4 and you could look at your free T3, and those numbers could all look fine. But if the reverse T3 is inactivating that active hormone T3, then you're still in trouble, right? So there's a breadth of knowledge and testing that really needs to be done that unfortunately is not standardly done. So people are suffering needlessly. And the thyroid has to do with so many different functions. It's part of our whole endocrine system. It really affects the stress gland, the adrenal glands. It affects fertility and reproduction and libido. So it has a lot of integration between a lot of other glands in the body that have to do with hormone function and mental function and energy level and weight and a lot of things that are bothering a lot of Americans. So you want to really look at all of those values. Now, in addition to that, I talk about autoimmune disease quite a bit, and there's a test called TPO, which is looking at an enzyme, and if that enzyme is at a certain level, it shows that the body is basically attacking your own thyroid, so a form of autoimmune disease. Hashimoto's is a very common autoimmune thyroid disease, and that can be evaluated with this test. Unfortunately, once again, a lot of standard panels don't look at that. They don't evaluate for that level. So then you're missing autoimmune thyroid. So these are the things that you want to look at, because if you're suffering from thyroid dysfunction, you want to know and you want to get it treated. Now, what sort of things aggravate the thyroid? Being under stress, it certainly aggravates a lot of things, but it definitely aggravates your thyroid as well. Toxic exposure can aggravate the thyroid, so that can come from poor diet, it can come from pesticides, it can come from drugs. Heavy metals like mercury toxicity can definitely affect the thyroid, and a lot of common nutritional deficiencies can do so as well. Vitamin D deficiency and essential fatty acids like the omega-3 fatty acids that we talk about in fish oil, that can affect iodine deficiencies. There's some very B vitamins, they can, all of those sort of impact how the thyroid functions. So when we're looking at thyroid, we really want to make sure we're doing a very thorough analysis, and sadly that's just not being effectively done standardly in America today, so people are suffering needlessly. The other thing that we really need to look at is how the adrenal glands are functioning, because the adrenal glands and the thyroid are very integrally related. And so someone could have their stress gland, their adrenal glands malfunctioning, and that's stressing or pulling down the thyroid function as well. So just another thing to address. Now, thyroid disease is about 17% of the population has it, so it's extremely common, yet over and above that there's a lot of people suffering who just don't know. I think we're going to probably do several videos on the thyroid and really go into more depth on it, but I kind of wanted to start off with this and let you know so that you can really start demanding those tests. If you're having these symptoms and you're really not finding out why, you really want to make sure you're getting fully tested. And last but not least, gluten, our friendly protein gluten, is very associated with autoimmune thyroid disease, as well as being a problem with general hypothyroid as well. So finding out if you have any food intolerances that are causing inflammation. So inflammation is a very common cause of thyroid disease, as well as a lot of degenerative diseases. Inflammation is that core that can create a multitude of problems, but inflammation and specifically gluten as a food is very tied into thyroid function, so you don't want to miss finding out if you have a gluten sensitivity or celiac disease. So just our first kind of foray into thyroid education. I hope you found it helpful, and if you have any questions, please let me know. I do love to hear from you, and until next time, I wish you very good health.